Good morning. Thank you for being here today. I told a couple of the guys beforehand, this is a bit of a science lesson. It'll be fun. I'm not a science teacher, so you can laugh at me, and that's fine. The point that I want to get across today is how awesome our God is, and the songs have been tailored in that direction this morning. I thank you, Foley, for doing that. We'll start with a question. Because of the holiday season, because of the way that we get together as a culture, you're going to be meeting with people soon that maybe you don't always meet with them. Maybe you do, but it'll be in a different, special kind of setting. So take a moment and think about that location where you're going to be meeting with your family and loved ones. The smells, positive and negative. The outfits that some people make a custom of wearing, special outfits. Whatever kind of clothing, or maybe ugly sweaters. The faces that you will get to enjoy meeting with. One day you're going to meet God. And while we have a few very shrouded implications and lessons of what that location might be like, the outfits that we might be wearing, no idea about the smell, but that you'll meet face to face with your God. Everyone, whether they believe in Him or not, is going to meet face to face with God. Imagine the surprise on the faces of those who do not believe, as you just testified, there is a God, He is alive. The shock that's going to come over their faces. How do you even know that there is a God that you will meet one day? Because if you followed along with the mental picture that I tried to paint, we already assumed, and as we just sang, there is a God that you put yourself in there. How do you know there is a God? Much less, as the sermon title would like to describe, how do you know He's awesome? The question itself is answered for us in Romans chapter 1. The statement, I believe, is an awesome thing for you to say. I believe there is a God. That's great. It's not good enough for some people, and if we're going to convince them that there is a God, we're going to need some evidence. Is there any evidence that God is real, that He exists, that He is awesome? Romans chapter 1 is where we are. This section of the scripture, after the statement of salvation being effective for everyone, is, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. I want to point out that the way that Paul is writing here is to say that the conclusion before he makes the argument. This is not the argument. The argument is not that it's true that God exists. That's true. That's not the argument. It's a statement of conclusion that just happens to be placed at the beginning. It points out that from the beginning, blind faith is not required for believing in God. Notice he doesn't say faith. He says truth. They suppress the truth. Well, who does this? Science does this at the moment. And Paul goes on to say that what's evident about God can be known to everyone, but people like to just change that. Science has been wrong on so many things and right about so many things. I like to get in a vehicle and drive it down the road, and science, mechanical engineering makes that possible. Science and mechanical engineering make it possible for us to sit in a warm building today. Let me give you another scientific principle to prove something, okay? If you'll tie a woman up and throw her in the river, if she sinks, she is a righteous person. If she floats, she's a witch, and you should burn her at the stake. It's a scientific principle. We don't follow that at the moment anymore, and thank God that we do not do such heinous things anymore. It's a scientific principle. Why don't we do it anymore? Because we've kind of figured out that's not how witches work. And while the Big Bang Theory and while an intelligent design is not permitted to be taught so much nowadays, one day it will be known, well, that was just a wrong scientific teaching. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, and we'll come back here often, his invisible, that is God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. I want to stop right here real quick. If you're following along in your Bible, you may have a different word than divine nature. We're going with the Greek word. The Greek word is defined as divine nature. If you want to have a discussion about the word that you have in your Bible, I'll be happy to do that afterwards. I'm not going to bag on it or make insult. We can talk about that later. His eternal power and divine nature, so much so that if you can't see it, there's an amount of foolishness that's involved on your part. God is evident because of creation. And we're going to go in one direction this morning. We will eventually turn back and look at the creation account. But I want to point out that just because we will only spend our time looking there and not at so many others, that it is repeated throughout history that all of the things that God created point to his handiwork. We'll only look at one of those proofs this morning. God is evident because of creation. Here's an anecdotal story. There are some scientists who are celebrating in a field. They're having a party. They've cracked a code. And God comes down to have a discussion with them. So says to the lead scientist, "Why are you celebrating?" He says, "You're God. We can make man just like you." God says, "That's very interesting. Show me." And they say, "You know what? It's your world. You go first." So God reaches down and picks up a handful of dirt and creates man. They say, "Okay." The lead scientist reaches down and God says, "Get your own dirt." Science is not always correct. And to say that they are always correct is foolish. God is so evident in everything that he does, you must change it. This is actually how this goes on in Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 23. Although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. To say that there's not an intelligent design, at the very least, in the creation of the world, the planets, nature, and everything. To say that there's not some kind of intelligence behind it not only requires mental gymnastics, you got to be a mental yoga master to do those mental gymnastics. It's so clear that something created and intelligently designed how the universe is. You go to stars, you can go all the way down to bugs, you can go all the way to trees, molecules, grains of sand, germs, any of it. Everything shows there's a natural design and an order to things. What kind of power can do that? Look here in verse 23, exchanging the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man. Aliens created the pyramids. It's actually taught on the History Channel that that there are aliens first, and that second, that they had some part in helping humanity to move forward, and they always look like little green, resembling the image of man. Just want to add that one real quick. What we do know, and what is evident to all, is something that you get taught used to get taught in high school science classes. And I know that because I didn't take any college science classes about matter and the universe. The law of conservation of mass states matter can change form through physical and chemical changes, but through any of these changes, matter is conserved. The same amount of matter exists before and after the change. None is created or destroyed. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. With all of the power that we do have as humans, we cannot create or destroy matter. We can change what it looks like. We can turn sand to glass. We can crush it back up into sand. But we can't actually make it not exist anymore. What kind of power can create something that cannot be created or destroyed. And so in just this one principle, the mental yoga and mental gymnastics to say that there's not a designer or some kind of creator is negative. Well, they are without excuse, as Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 says. There are two evidences that are given for the power of God, for the awesomeness of God, or for basically just the existence of God. The two evidences that are listed here are his eternal power and his divine nature. And not only that, we're supposed to be able to see his eternal power and his divine nature because of creation. That's the argument. Because of creation, you should know he is eternally powerful and that he is divine, that he has divinity. Okay? How do you do that? Well, first of all, eternal power. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, it is eternal. It goes on forever. It can't change. You can change what form it is, but you can't change the fact that matter is. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Okay, if you can't create it or destroy it, then what kind of power does it take to create it or destroy it? A greater power. A greater power than an eternal power. A greater power than an eternal power. The matter of, or the existence of anything proves that whatever created it is greater than the thing that exists. One more time. The existence of anything proves that whatever created it has greater power. We can't change that matter exists. What kind of power does it take to create something that we can't change its existence? Eternal power. That points to the fact that God is eternal. It points to the fact that whatever that is, whatever awesomeness that you could possibly come up with, or that you could design and make in this world, however awesome it could be, God is greater. What about the sun? What about the power of the sun? God is greater than the power of the sun. What about when stars explode and cast galaxies? God's greater than that. It kind of reminds me of that in all of the awesome things that Elijah gets to see, God still loves to represent himself as a still, small voice. In all of the ways that God could have shown his power, and like Jeremy discussed this morning, this is a way Jesus could have shown his power to come off of the cross. But this is the way he likes to show his power. It's always there. It's available for everyone, so that all are, as Romans chapter 1 verse 20 say, without excuse. Here it is for everyone to see for all time. As long as there is existence, here is proof that God is. To create something eternal requires an eternal creator. To create something that cannot be destroyed requires the creator to be one that cannot be destroyed. So what about his divine nature? So that's eternal power. What about his divine nature? Because of creation, we know that God is a being who can create something. What is it about his creation that tells us of his divine nature? Well, looking at the design that he has given, we can see that he is one who requires order and requires things be done in order. That's something that he prefers, and it's something that shows his divine nature. So if you'll come with me to Genesis chapter 1, we're not going to read a lot of the scriptures, but we're going to point out logic from these scriptures. First of all, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There is three things that are created right here: time, space, and matter. I'm stealing this from a scientist. You can find it on TikTok, YouTube, videos online. Time, space, and matter are all created right here. God exists outside of time, space, and matter. What does that mean? God created time, space, and matter. Who created your telephone? Are they inside your telephone? Do they have to obey the laws that your telephone obeys? Not at all. Telephone can exist or not exist, and it doesn't change anything about the guy that created the telephone. Before there was heaven and earth, before there was time, space, and matter, God exists, and he don't have to follow any of the rules. He's not subject to the rules of time, of space, or of matter. How can God exist in Egypt and Antarctica and here at the same time? He doesn't exist in the world. He exists through the world. Time, space, and matter. How do you know that all three were created right here at the same time? Okay. In the beginning is time. God created space. There's got to be a place for the thing to be. The heavens and the earth. And there's matter. If you had time and space without matter, what would you put in it? If you had matter and space, when would you put it? If you had matter and time, where would you put it? You have all three that are created at the same time. Time, space, and matter. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes beyond that in order. First, he created and separated the light from the darkness. He creates planets, stars, solar systems. He creates difference in light and dark at the very least, and sets in motion the planets. There is a place for his creation to be. Day 2. God separates the waters. He creates atmospheric boundaries. In the creation of the earth, now you have an earth that can be inhabited by something. Thank God that he did not create Adam on day 2, because number 1, he'd have to have gills, and number 2, there's no atmosphere for him. So before man is ever created, here's a world. Here's a space for the world to exist in. Now let's separate the outside space from the inside space. We'll create atmosphere so that this world is contained. On day 3, dry ground and plants. Whenever things start to be created, they're going to need a place to be. They're going to need dry ground to walk on if they're a land animal, or even if they're a bird, they need a place to land. And they're all going to need something to eat. That has to be prepared, or thankfully God shows us that that is prepared ahead of time. Second point, or second tier. Actually, this would be the tertiary tier of order. God says that things are going to reproduce after their own kinds. Acorns make oak trees. That's the way it works. You will reproduce after your own kind, and that's common throughout. Day 4, sun and moon and stars galore, if you're singing the song along. Now, whether this is the creation of our sun or the moving of it into place, and a moon and moving it into place, however this exact creation falls out, we can debate. The point is that God put these things in order so that we would have, and he says in his word, cycles and seasons. What does the moon do? It controls the tide. I understand we don't have any tidally controlled rivers here, but go to the emergency room on a full moon night. The nurses will tell you that it does matter. Teachers will tell you that about the kids in their class. That full moon, oof. That's why those people are called, and not necessarily any of your kids or the people in the emergency rooms, but the word lunatic means of lunar persuasion. The moon made me crazy. The sun gives seasons. What are you going to give seasons to? The trees. Man, why do you have apple pie at this time of year? Because apples don't fall in February. I don't know, maybe they do. The Orange Blossom Festival does not show up on April 15th. Or maybe it does. I think that one's in the right spot. The point is that there are seasons, there are signs, and there are the way that the order is set is so that the next thing can be created. Birds and sea creatures. And that things are starting to inhabit the earth. Things are starting to be used to move seeds from here to there. How do you get fish in ponds without stocking ponds? Ducks. They land in this pond and they get eggs on their feet, and then they fly to that pond, and now you got eggs in that pond. You transplant. God has set up a system to transplant fish eggs from this pond to that pond to that pond. He calls them ducks, and they both taste great if prepared properly. Land animals are created almost lastly. But notice that God creates the land animals before he creates mankind. All of these are set after their own purpose so that when mankind gets here, you've got everything you need. Everything. The entire creation is created so that you can have everything. Here is the entire world. And God tells Adam and Eve, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the birds of the heavens, over livestock, and over all things that creep, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Would God not have to go back and say, oh, I just created kangaroos. They have pockets. You can have dominion over them too. No, everything's created, and then man is given the entire world. I just want to take a moment here and point out Jesus has gone to create a place for you. And when it is completely ready, he gets to come back and say, here is a fully complete heaven waiting for you. Thank you, Jesus. But there's one day left, right? There's one day left. Rest. And that's that point. The first day that man gets to experience is God sitting back, in essence. Please understand, I don't want to be irreverent in this statement. Not at all. The first day that man gets to experience is God resting. He said, I did the work that I was supposed to do, and now I rest from my labors. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. Adam and Eve are created, and on the very first day after the sun is set and then rises, at the end of the day 6, they experience day 7, and they look around and say, God, what are you doing? I'm resting. I did everything I was supposed to do. I created everything for you. I've given it to you. I'm done. I'm going to rest. The creator of life, the universe, and everything is an awesome God and shows us not only the order in which he has done things that's just perfect, but that at the end of perfect, there is a rest. From creation alone, we can see his eternal power and his divine nature. There is a God. He is alive. Does it matter to us? What does it matter to us? He created all of these things and he gave it to us awesomely. He gave us his word so that we would know what it is that he expects of us. And did you know that he actually wrote it down exactly what is expected of you? Ecclesiastes chapter 12. The end of the matter all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every secret deed into judgment, whether for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. What is it that man is supposed to do? Do the work that's required. Fear God and keep his commandments, because there remains a rest. Come with me, if you would, to Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4, and we'll conclude our message this morning. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them. They were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter that rest. As he said, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, he said, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, And those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Again, he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David, and so long afterward, in the words already quoted, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, therefore, remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to keep that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of the soul and the spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. From the very creation, and because of creation, God shows his eternal power and divine nature. He sets forth from the beginning, before death even exists, the idea of resting whenever your work is done. And when sin does become a real thing that shows up and causes death in mankind, immediately he says, I will have a way to fix it. Jesus, the one who can mediate between us and him, making sure that we have entrance into that promised rest. If we have an eternal Sabbath, we must fear God and keep his commandments. We serve an awesome God. Let us then draw near to his throne. If there is anything that you need to give to God, to put on him and ask to see his divine power shown in grace and mercy, do it now before we leave. Do it as we stand and sing.